Who had grandparents fight in WW2, and what stories did they share? My grandfather fought in World War II, and the stories he shared with me over the years revealed a side of the war that was often missing from the history books, the quiet, painful moments that defined a soldier's experience far more than the battles themselves. He enlisted when he was just 19, fresh out of high school, full of a mix of idealism and fear. Like so many young men of that era, he wanted to do his part, but he had no idea what awaited him overseas. He was assigned to an infantry division that landed in Normandy shortly after D-Day. He never talked about the landing itself much. Instead, his memories focused on the endless march through devastated French villages, the bitter cold, the mud, and the hunger. One story he often repeated was about a day in the Ardennes forest during the Battle of the Bulge. His unit was tasked with holding a small remote village that had been ravaged by the fighting. It was late December, and snow was falling heavily. The temperatures dropped well below freezing, and his clothes were soaked through from the relentless wet. They had barely any food or proper winter gear. The men were exhausted, and morale was low. On one particularly cold night, my grandfather and 3 others were sent out on patrol. The forest was silent except for the crunch of their boots on the snow. Visibility was near zero. Suddenly, they encountered a small group of German soldiers, equally lost and desperate. The 2 groups froze in place, weapons raised, but unmoving. Neither side fired. Instead, they silently acknowledged the misery that bound them. My grandfather described this moment as surreal. Enemies, bound by circumstance rather than hatred, caught in the same storm. They exchanged no words, just a glance that said, "We're both just trying to survive." Then the Germans quietly slipped away into the darkness. He said that night stayed with him longer than any firefight. It was a strange kind of mercy amid chaos, a human moment in an inhuman war. Another memory was about the mail. Letters from home were treasured more than food or ammunition. One letter from his mother was so vivid in his memory that he read it aloud to me years later. It was a simple note filled with love and worry, words meant to remind him he wasn't alone. Those letters kept his hope alive, especially when everything else around him seemed to fall apart. He also recounted the day they liberated a small village in France. The town was starving and terrified, but when the soldiers arrived, the locals greeted them with tears and trembling hands, offering the little food they had left. My grandfather talked about the children who clung to the soldiers' legs, trusting strangers after years of occupation. For him, that day was a rare glimpse of light, a moment when the war's brutality gave way to something resembling hope. But the war was never just about moments like those. My grandfather carried deep scars from losing friends, some just boys like himself, who never made it home. He recalled how the sound of artillery fire wasn't as frightening as the silence that followed when someone was hit. He lost many comrades to the randomness of war, sometimes in ways that felt cruelly senseless. After the war, my grandfather returned home a changed man. He never sought glory or medals, but he always remembered the people, the friends, the strangers, the civilians caught in the crossfire. The war taught him about the fragility of life and the strength it took simply to endure. His stories weren't just about battle, they were about survival, humanity, and loss. Through his eyes, I came to understand that World War II was more than dates and strategies. It was a collection of small moments, each carrying the weight of a lifetime. Those stories, told in his quiet voice, stayed with me long after he was gone. They were a reminder of the cost of war and the resilience of those who lived through it.